Hi, I'm Anna,
I'm Jessica.
and this is the Paranoia Pair. Today, we're going to do the Tuskegee Syphilis Experiment.
Already sounds pretty awful.
Yeah. Okay, so syphilis, to start us off, it's a sexually transmitted infection, also known as an STI, caused by bacteria known as Treponema pallidum. It goes through several different stages, starting with a sore that's painless, and then it usually develops into a rash, and there's other symptoms in the secondary stage. And it can lead to potentially severe complications if it's left untreated, both physically and mentally.
Isn't that what Hitler had? And he went crazy because he had syphilis?
Uh, Maybe, and that kind of would make sense for reasons we will get into.
Okay, okay.
Okay. It can also be asymptomatic, though, making it difficult to know if you've contracted it unless you get proper testing done, which just means that you don't have any symptoms. So you're like a carrier,
I don't
basically.
like that.
I
Does
know.
it still, if you're a carrier, does it still affect your like health or?
I believe so.
Okay.
Um, of course, we've all been taught this in health class, though. What we didn't get taught in health class was the dark history of syphilis, how we grew to know the symptoms, and just how bad it got if it was left untreated. During World War One, it was a trying time for everybody involved, and countries couldn't afford to lose their soldiers for non-combat related reasons. So, in an effort to make them physically healthy, they campaigned on safe sex. But another reason they were campaigning so hard was because soldiers were sent to Europe where brothels were illegal.
Brothels and safe sex just don't seem like they go together.
Right? We'll get into that a little bit. It was believed to be a way to keep soldiers happy, and of course, many of them were married. And um, they did not tell their wives. It was like kept like a huge secret, basically. There were two kinds of brothels for different ranked men. There were blue lamp brothels, which were for officers, and there were red lamp brothels, which were used for the lower ranks. You probably heard of the red light district,
Oh, I
which is where this comes from.
I have orange string lights on my front porch, and my grandma and my neighbor said that it looks like we're representing for the red light district, but they're orange. I swear.
As you would expect, the blue light brothels were better furnished, and they even had champagne, and some even had cooks.
Ooh.
The red lamp brothels were more raggedy. And when I say raggedy, I mean like instead of a bed, they had a stretcher and a thin sheet, a thin blanket, and a pillow. And that was it.
That's kind of like what I think more of brothels, though, like not really extravagant, but kind of just
Mhm.
like run down
You're
and
there to get the job done, and then you leave.
ugh.
Another perk of the blue lamp brothels were condoms, which the red lamp establishments did not have.
Oh,
Yep. As a result, 150,000 British soldiers contracted gonorrhea or syphilis. And get ready because the American soldiers that got gonorrhea or syphilis was 357,969.
good grief.
So soldiers that were infected were sent to get treatment where they stayed in hospitalization for 30 days. That was mandatory. It didn't matter if it was a reoccurring case or not, it was 30 days. So the total time missed for the hospital stays, just for the American troops, was over 6.5 million total days.
I think after I got syphilis or gonorrhea once, I think I'd quit going
Yeah.
to the brothels.
After that, you just gotta do it with your own two hands.
Yep.
So they began shutting down the red light districts and regularly testing the sex workers to help reduce the spread. And they treated syphilis with mercury.
Oh,
You know, that poisonous metal.
yeah, we had a mercury shut down in our school once.
Mhm.
We or lock in.
Yeah, they found it, like, on the bottom of someone's shoes or whatever. Like, and then someone was playing with it on their desk.
That sounds like kids.
Yeah. So mercury was mixed as an ointment, and then it was applied to the affected area. It was also added into tablets that were taken orally, and they were even given it through injections. And it was also being treated the same way with arsenic, which is another
Oh.
poison.
Okay.
So after the war, the number of cases began to increase again back home. But the social climate now was more modest, and the safe sex campaigns had died down as a result. They seen it as immoral and not something that should be discussed openly.
STDs?
So life wasn't really the easiest for African Americans at this time. Despite fighting for their country, Black soldiers came back to a nation that was still stuck in its racist ways. It was a clear sign that racial tensions were still running pretty high. During this time, a lot of African Americans moved from the South to the North, hoping to find better jobs and escape the violence. Um, It changed a lot of cities, and unfortunately, even in the North, they faced new kinds of discriminations and economic hurdles. And it was very common at the time for African Americans to quit school and help their families work on farms for extra money. So a lot of these kids, they would not go back to school. Like would get pulled out and they'd just never go back.
Like the Amish.
Except they did pull out like way earlier.
Really?
Yeah. This led to many of them not knowing how to read or write.
Oh, damn.
And amidst all this, the syphilis outbreak made things even worse for Black communities because they were suffering the worst. Because they had a lack of decent health care access and the racial biases that were in the medical field. This will be relevant. By the 1930s, 1 in 10 Americans had syphilis, and it had basically became an epidemic. One year they actually had 1 million cases that were reported.
Jesus.
18% of all deaths from heart disease were related to syphilis because if left untreated so long, it can affect your heart.
That's crazy.
And 60,000 children were born each year with syphilis.
That's sad.
It is so sad. And a lot of the, it's really common for like deformities and stuff too to happen to your kids because of the syphilis that you have that's untreated. So there was a lot of stigma against people with syphilis. And it was honestly really degrading. They thought they were disgusting and dirty. And people believed that everybody who had it either was a sex worker or associated with the sex workers. Like they would go and visit them and stuff. They thought they could contract it by touching dirty dishes, infected money, and kissing. And there was also a fear that they could get syphilis from their maids or barbers who were African American.
I mean, as someone with contamination OCD, I'm afraid that I can get herpes from everything. So to an extent, I'm afraid of all that.
Yeah.
But
I just assume that all the money that I touch has like traces of cocaine on it. That's why I lick all my money. Just kidding.
I knew you licked menus.
For money. This led to significant social ostracization and discrimination against those who were diagnosed with the disease and those who presented symptoms. Many doctors were reluctant to treat patients that had syphilis, and those who often did so in secret to avoid damaging their reputations. So, Dr. Thomas Perrin in 1930 was the New York State Health Commissioner, and he really shifted public arguments from more of a moral perception to financially to address the STD rise. He even refused to give a radio speech when they banned him from mentioning syphilis or gonorrhea. So he just was like, okay, if I can't say these words, then there's no point in me doing it. He also advocated for a free diagnostic center to be started to offer therapy. And he advocated for mandatory blood testing, public education about the diseases, and he will play a significant role in this experiment later on. We'll kind of touch on.
Here I thought he was going to be a good guy.
You know, it always starts like that. In 1932, the United States Public Health Service started a research project. Dr. Oliver W. Hill was a senior surgeon at the U.S. Public Health Service, and he played a significant role. He was involved in the study's design and implementation, overseeing the medical aspects and ensuring that the protocols were followed. Now, I don't know what fucking protocols this man was supposed to be enforcing, but we'll get into it when the time comes. Dr. Clark was a public health service officer who guaranteed that the government was giving their full support for the study. Dr. Raymond von der Leyer was the on-site director of the study, and he assisted Dr. Clark in conducting research. Dr. Heller was Dr. von der Leyer's assistant at the Tuskegee study, and Nurse Rivers was a public health nurse who worked closely with the public health service, and she was trusted in the community as an African American nurse. So she was like they're in with this community.
Okay.
Which made her like extremely valuable. Like they did not want to lose this woman. So Dr. Clark sent Dr. Raymond von der Leyer to Tuskegee, Alabama to find a group of men with syphilis for the upcoming study. The nature of the study was to show the effects of untreated syphilis in African American men and compare it to what they were finding in white men. So what better place to do this than Macon County, Alabama, when the population is 80% African American. So because of this, they also had the highest number of cases in the African Americans. So this is like the gold mine, basically, for them. And so the Public Health Service had support from the Tuskegee Institution, was a local Black college. Like, think like, you know how like prominent Harvard is? This is like the Harvard, basically, of the South.
Is it still around?
It is, and now it's the Tuskegee University instead of the Tuskegee Institute.
Okay.
So the Tuskegee Institution was supporting this project. They also gave them up a section of their campus to do this project on. And the scientists promised the university that at the end of the experiment, the men would be treated.
At the end?
Yes. At the end of the experiment, they would basically find a better treatment for these men and that they would be treated. So they promised treatment for these guys. Researchers knew that more than half the population consisted of sharecroppers, and sharecroppers is people who own land and then they let other people grow on it, and their payment for letting them do that is a portion of their crops that they grow.
Okay.
Many of the people in the area had never seen a doctor before because they couldn't afford to see one. And at the time, there wasn't very many doctors in that area to begin with. The researchers believed that citizens living in this area were vulnerable because they were, for the reasons I mentioned above, and they were seen as a target. And this is not me exaggerating, because the doctors literally say in interviews that it was harder to get white men to participate in the study.
But why?
I would think because of the stigma around it, and they did not have consent of these African Americans.
So
they had, because they couldn't read, they couldn't write, a lot of them couldn't even sign their name, so they gave no consent.
Oh.
They had, actually, we'll get into it. But so not only did they admit that this marginalized group was undereducated, but they also admitted they did not have the same resources as white men. They believe that these people were an inferior race, and that they believed with all the medical knowledge that they had that syphilis was a, quote, black disease. They are quoted as saying that in interviews.
Even though it started in Britain?
Yeah. So because of their lack of accessibility to afford health care, the number of cases in African Americans were higher than white men. But instead of seeing how racist and systematically prejudiced our entire government was at the time, they seen this as proof that African Americans were beneath white men, and that's in both the physical and the moral sense. So they just thought that these black men had no morals at all, and that's why they're spreading these diseases, because they had no respect for others or themselves.
Or they had no education on the diseases.
Yeah. So the doctors seen syphilis as a threat to white people, and that was basically the sole motivator for the study. So Nurse Rivers was in charge of recruiting men for the Tuskegee Syphilis Experiment, and she gathered about 600 African Americans in this county, and they were recruited because they were poor and they were from rural areas in the county. They promised these men free medical care, hot meals, and burial insurance in exchange for their participation.
That's a little scary to join an experiment and getting burial insurance.
Mm-hmm.
That would be a red flag.
Yeah. So keep in mind, these men didn't have any sort of education, and if they did, it was very, very little. They had to rely on their paperwork being read to them, and like I said earlier, a lot of them couldn't even sign their names. So the 600 men's blood was tested, and 399 of them had syphilis, and 201 of them did not. So the 399 men who had syphilis were not informed that they had it at all. So they were misled about what they were doing with the study, and many of them were in the stage where they didn't have any physical symptoms, so they just generally didn't know that anything was even wrong with them. Dr. Hill and Dr. Clark were part of the team that misled the participants. They were telling them that they were being treated for bad blood rather than informing them that they had syphilis. And so the term bad blood was just a generalized term that covered a variety of sicknesses. So it could be like high blood pressure or something. So there was really no specification. Like it could be anything. And it was such a widely used term. They're just like, oh, okay, this makes sense.
That's very it sounds like a very uneducated, like them using the term bad blood just makes it sound like uneducated because they're putting so many sicknesses in to one term.
Mm-hmm. And it was actually commonly used. We'll actually go into like a program that used bad blood terminology basically as like the face of their campaign.
Sounds like some Harry Potter stuff, some muggle blood
Yeah.
things.
That's what I thought too. Okay. So they were also not told that the disease could be transmitted through sexual intercourse. So these men were unknowingly spreading syphilis either to their girlfriends, people they were seeing, and even their wives.
And inadvertently probably children.
Mm-hmm. And they believed that they were getting treatment for bad blood rather than to observe the progression of their untreated syphilis. And the 201 men who were syphilis free served as the control group.
I was afraid that they were gonna like purposely get them syphilis.
No, but we'll get into that at the very end. Okay, so the Rosalind Fund was involved in a syphilis control program in the same county in February from 1930 to September of 1931. And during this time, they operated a bad blood wagon. And it was basically, think like what the Red Cross does. So it's like a mobile treatment unit, basically, that traveled to different locations and they provided medical care and treatment for syphilis. So the Public Health Service actually took over this program after they could no longer afford the treatments that they were giving, basically. So treatment basically was a part of the study in the very beginning, but this is even before the Public Health Service was involved. The program was successful in reaching a large number of people, but it was discontinued due to funding limitations, and the Public Health Service did take it over in 1932, and that became the Tuskegee Syphilis Experiment. During the appointments that these men would go to, they would get their blood drawn, and they were given arsenic, bismuth, and mercury. So I've never heard of bismuth before. It's related to arsenic, so it's non-toxic though. But even though it's non-toxic, it still has a variety of, side effects, including headaches, nausea, diarrhea, abdominal pain, and if you ingest enough of it, it can cause damage to your kidneys.
So Taco Bell.
I love Taco Bell, though. You can pry that Taco Bell out of my dead hands.
When you messaged my husband the other day and said something about fries, he's like, what is she talking about? And I was like, probably Taco Bell. And then I think he messaged you back asking, and he's like, yep, it was Taco Bell. He's like, I figured it was Taco Bell.
Has he tried them? They're so good.
Not yet. He hasn't been to Taco Bell
so
yet.
Good. I thought about dropping them off one day.
He would eat the shit out of it if he did.
So good. Dr. Vonderlayer supported giving the men partial treatment because he thought it would make more men participate in the experiment. So, again, it was part of the study, but it's partial treatment. He didn't want to give them full treatment because then they wouldn't have it anymore and he couldn't observe them.
So is it like mostly treatment to like treatment of the symptoms but not the disease type thing, where like
kind of.
Okay.
So many of the men were grateful for being selected as part of the study because they thought they were getting treatment. None of them had any clue they were part of a research experiment, though. They did know that it was part of a study, but they weren't exactly aware of the extent, basically.
Okay.
The women in these men's lives were starting to get upset, though, because they were having the same bad blood symptoms of these men, but they weren't part of the experiment. They only wanted to experiment on the men, so they were not giving these women treatment at all. They were just leaving them to suffer, basically.
That's what I was wondering about, why they were only doing men and not the women as well.
So Nurse Rivers said in an interview that these men were happy at the time because they felt cared for, because these doctors were coming from all over the country to come look at them and check on them. They were so excited that the government finally cared about them.
Isn't it a little messed up that Nurse Rivers being a part of the community?
Yeah. They were happy to receive medical treatment from the government. They often brought baked goods and stuff to their doctors, and that just broke my heart. Because a lot of these men were old to begin with. And so and like the racial tensions and everything, and like the Jim Crow laws.
They're just trying to make good. They're trying to get along good. And like, I don't.
That's like someone's grandma. You know, like when you meet someone's grandma and they're like, I baked you this. And you're like, oh my God, I'm so special. That's what it's like.
Yeah, if an old person gives me something, it's done for. I can't handle it. It's too sweet.
I owe you everything.
Yep. You're my grandma now.
If you want my car, just say the word, it's yours.
I've only got $3 to my name, but it's all yours.
So these men really did trust her, and they loved her for helping take care of them and for caring for them. And she also made sure that these men weren't seeking treatment from other doctors who weren't on the research team.
That's so shady.
So, Dr. Vonderlayer came up with policies which gained consent in air quotes, guys, of these African-American men to receive spinal taps. And that started in 1933. The participants received letters saying that the last free treatment was being given out, so more and more people showed up. So these letters say, Dear Sir, some time ago you were given a thorough examination, and since that time, we hope you have gotten a great deal of treatment for bad blood. You will now be given your last chance to get a second examination. This examination is a very special one, and after it is finished, you will be given a special treatment if it is believed you are in a condition to stand it. If you want the special examination and treatment, you must meet the nurse at insert location, date, and time. She will bring you to the Tuskegee Institute Hospital for this free examination and treatment. We will be very busy when these examinations and treatments are being given, and we'll have lots of people to wait on. You will remember that from when you had to wait for some time when you had your last good examination, and we wish to let you know that because we expect to be so busy, that it might be necessary for you to remain in the hospital over one night. If this is necessary, you will be furnished for your meals and a bed, and as well as the examination and treatment without cost. Remember, this is your last chance for special free treatment. Be sure to meet the nurse, and the last part is all in caps. And that is from the Macon County Health Department.
And you'd think that that's something you can trust.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I wouldn't
Yeah,
think that there'd be anything shady going on getting letters from the health department.
and the way that they worded it too, like, this is your last chance to receive special treatment. So, like, of course, people are on board,
Right.
like, going to this examination. So, the primary purpose of these spinal taps were to diagnose neurosyphilis, which is syphilis that has infected your central nervous system.
Spinal taps aren't those like pretty serious
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
procedures?
Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. So, this procedure involved inserting a needle into the lower back to extract cerebral spinal fluid for examination. Participants were told that the spinal taps were a form of special treatment rather than a diagnostic procedure. This was part of the broader deception that characterized the study, as the men believed they were receiving care for their conditions. Spinal taps are invasive. They can be painful, causing significant discomfort and potential complications. The participants were not informed about the risks associated with the procedure, and they weren't given the option to refuse either. They used the spinal taps without proper consent and under false pretenses that were exemplified by the exploitation of the patients. And the procedure was not for the benefit at all, it was solely to gather data for the study. In 1933, the experiment had their first death. The patient died from complications related to untreated syphilis. One of the patients, named Herman Shaw, said that his father in law was also part of the study, and they had paid the family $35 for his burial and performed an autopsy on him. So $35 in 1933 equates $849.71 in today's money.
That's not very much though.
No.
Is that the burial insurance?
Mhm.
That's fucked up. That was
Yeah.
all they got.
Mm-hmm. And so getting autopsies at the time were top priority. They would take the brain and the heart for examination, and Nurse Rivers was instructed to not let patients die at home. There was a particularly bad case where this man was described as having half of his chest eroded because of his syphilis. And they were like sure he was going to die soon. And they insisted, do not let this man die at home. Bring him in. So when he dies here, and we can immediately open him up to examine him.
That's sad.
Yeah. So the experiment originally was only supposed to be 6 to 8 months long, which is why they made that promise. Hey, we're going to treat these guys after we're done with the study, because it was only supposed to be a couple months. In June of 1933, Dr. Clark retired, and Dr. von der Leyer took his place as head of venereal disease division. He decided he was going to continue the study until the death of every single participant. And that's because the original part of the study failed to produce any sort of useful data, basically. I don't know what data they were looking for because people were dying. I'm assuming these people were just living longer than they expected them to. That's my guess.
That is so depressing.
Mm-hmm.
So if the other guy hadn't retired, they could have possibly Like, this might have not went further?
I think it's very likely it would have. They were just starting to see cases of cardiovascular syphilis, which means that the syphilis had been untreated so long that um, it was now beginning to affect their hearts. So the doctors in charge referred to this as them hitting the gold mine in their letters in support of continuing the study. Resourcing the heavy metals that were used in the treatment, because remember, we're treating people with arsenic and mercury, it was incredibly expensive. And so, um, instead of giving them these treatments, they were now giving them iron tonics and aspirin. And iron tonic is basically an iron supplement in liquid form, so it's mixed with, like, a sweetener for, like, flavor, and it's also mixed with, like, a bunch of other vitamins, and it's used for treating anemia, and it can also help your digestion, which I sign me up because I actually would benefit for that. So Dr. Clark and his team provided the participants with these placebo treatments instead of proper treatment, and Nurse Rivers helped them administer these treatments. In 1937, the Bad Blood Wagon, funded by the Rosenwald Fund and staffed by the Public Health Service, returned to Macon County to begin a treatment program again. And the treatment was a new 5-day treatment that they had pushed out. They basically discovered we can cure syphilis if we just pump these people with high doses of arsenic in their blood through an IV over the course of 5 days. So that's what they're doing.
I don't think you survive arsenic, that much arsenic.
Nurse Rivers was one of the important people staffed on this program because she would identify men who were part of the experiment and make sure they were not getting this new 5-day treatment they were offering. So, there was actually a man who showed up to this program. She recognized his name on the paper as being one of the participants, and she told him, "You're not supposed to be here. You're supposed to be getting treatment at the medical center in Tuskegee. This is like basically this is inferior to the treatment that you're getting. You're already being treated. You don't need to be here." Basically gaslighting him, lying to him, sent him home on a bus. So by the late 1930s and 40s, a large portion of the participants were dying due to their untreated syphilis. The death rates of the men with syphilis were twice the rate of the men who didn't have syphilis, and the life expectancy of the men who were infected with syphilis was estimated to be 8 years less than the men who did not. Nurse Rivers would attend the funerals of the men who died.
That's messed up.
She would hold hands with the victims' families and then convince them to do autopsies on their bodies.
The funerals?
She would basically say, "Oh, I cared about them so much. Don't you want to know what killed your husband? Please do me this favor. We'll figure out what happened to your husband, why he died, and we'll give you money." And of course, these people are poor. They need the money. So, of course, they're not going to expect this nurse to have like nefarious reasons for wanting this done. The autopsies were done at John Andrews Hospital, which was on the campus of Tuskegee Institute. Dr. Perrin, who remember from before, he was appointed Surgeon General in the 1930s, 1936 to be exact. His job basically consisted with providing Americans the best scientific information available on how to improve their health and reduce their risk of sicknesses. Being a lead spokesperson on the matters of public health, they also communicate important health information to the public and policymakers, issue reports on critical health issues, and the Surgeon General also advises the Secretary of Health and Humane Services and the Assistant Secretary for Health on Public Health Issues and Scientific. He also was the operational head of the U.S. Public Health Service. So, with all that in mind, he absolutely knew that all of this was happening because he is the head, basically, of this department. He actually was aware and supported its continuation, and he believed that the study would provide valuable data on the natural progression of untreated syphilis, no matter the unethical practices that they took to get that information. He wanted this information no matter what. He didn't care. So much for his campaigns from earlier.
Plus the like he's a doctor, so the they swear in that like do no harm type thing.
Well, these men actually didn't think they were doing any harm, but I'm gonna get into it later.
And I was gonna say it's surprising to me that like no one like attention wasn't brought to all these men dying, because that's 399 men with syphilis, and so like if they're gonna wait until they all die, like that's 399 dead men. But then I
But they're
remembered
black men.
I was gonna
And
say then I
it's
remembered
yeah.
they're a minority, so
Mhm.
of course they didn't remember, or they weren't paying any attention to that.
So by 1941, the Tuskegee Syphilis Experiment was still ongoing. Participants continued receiving placebo treatments, and that would actually continue on throughout this entire study's duration. Around this time, they had discovered that penicillin could be used as a treatment to cure syphilis, but they were still kind of on the study side of it, so it wasn't like something they were advertising just yet. This treatment was starting to become available, though, and be taken by some individuals basically in participation with the study of this, how effective it was. It was, however, kept from the participants' knowledge of the study, and it reinforces that they were not studying to find a cure. They had basically no intention on giving these men treatment. Um, so, this was all about taking advantage of these men for morbid and racist curiosity. And the researchers continued to monitor the participants' health through regular medical examinations every year, and this included spinal taps to diagnose neurosyphilis, as well as x-rays to diagnose cardiovascular syphilis.
Yearly spinal taps?
Yearly spinal taps, blood draws, and x-rays. So there was the threat of World War II happening in 1941. The government was focusing on drafting people for war. And since draftees were ages between 18 to 45, were being tested and treated for syphilis to serve in the military, there was a huge concern that these participants in the study would go and get drafted. So they would be receiving treatment, effectively making them no longer able to participate in the study. So to ensure that they weren't part of the people getting drafted, the researchers took advantage of the fact that the men were falsely diagnosed with bad blood, making them unfit for military service, basically. Basically guaranteeing that they would not be drafted, and they also asked the Macon County board, basically who drafts them in that county, to not draft all of these men who are part of the study, and they agreed.
Was there an age range for the 400 or the
Yes.
399 men?
It was, I believe it was like 25 to like 70.
Jeez.
So huge age range. 1942, Dr. John Cutler joined the Public Health Service, and he worked on venereal disease research, and he became the lead researcher on this project. So he basically took over. He also was part of the team that convinced local doctors not to treat these participants. 1943, penicillin became available in large enough amounts that they could basically use it to be the sole treatment to get rid of syphilis. And that had become the standard. Dr. Heller was in charge of making sure nobody found out about penicillin who was part of the experiment. And there was a law in Alabama that stated if anybody had syphilis, they had to get treatment. It was law. So these people were breaking the law and ethical codes.
Well, not only that, but they were making the patients have to break the law unknowingly.
Yeah. And in the 1950s, there was an economic boom after World War II that led to rapid industrialization of the northern and western cities. And this created high demand for labor, and that attracted many people from rural areas in the South um, to go to these urban areas to get better job opportunities. And I'm assuming the pay also was probably pretty good. And remember, these people were like sharecroppers, and there just wasn't that money in farming anymore. Factory jobs in the North often paid significantly more than agricultural work in the South, and it also provided a strong incentive for people to move. This was a problem, though, because some of the men in the experiment were moving away to these highly populated areas, and they were getting out of the range where they could continually check in to the medical institution that they had. Um, and they were still unaware that they had syphilis. So basically, they were effectively spreading syphilis throughout different regions of the country
Could have at least
because
told them
they,
that
yeah,
bad blood was like
I
contagious.
know, because they were unaware. And this led to public health service offices to track down patients across the country and make sure that they remain part of the so called study. So basically, they would check in with their local public health office instead of traveling back, and they would just send that report to whoever was in charge. They also had to make sure that they were the ones who performed the autopsies on these men in case they died, to ensure that they were collecting data while hiding the cause of death from the families. So, again, Nurse River is begging these women to let them do the autopsies to find out a reason why they died. They're not telling these people the real reason. Those same families likely also had syphilis and were suffering because they probably weren't getting treatment either. And if they were continuously getting it.
Oh yeah.
hmm So they actually had a written memorandum from the Public Health Service stating that they were looking forward to doing these autopsies. Basically, they referred to the autopsies as a rich harvest, and they were looking forward to 200 autopsies within the next 5 to 10 years. So again, they didn't think these men were going to live that long.
Isn't it crazy? Like these people hoping for people to just die. For other
To look at the inside of their bodies. So in 1952, the study was reviewed by a group of government doctors and officials from the U.S. Public Health Service. A few of these doctors were interviewed. One of them was asked how he felt about penicillin continuing to be withheld from this group of men, and he stated that he agreed with the decision because by the time penicillin was available, these men had been living with syphilis for 25 years.
25 years.
25 years of untreated syphilis. And he literally said, and I quote, "If a man has had syphilis for 25 years, you don't treat them, you congratulate them."
Honestly, I'm surprised that they could live for 25
I
years
know.
with
I'm
syphilis.
sure these men were also shocked, and that's probably why they also didn't want to treat them. They wanted to see how long they could live. These men had syphilis for so long that they weren't even sure that giving them penicillin would have cured it. In his defense, is what he was basically saying. So instead of giving them the medicine to see if they could cure it after going untreated for so long, they decided, I'm gonna just not treat you and just see how bad it can get.
How much worse can it get after 25
I
years?
know. And one of the people's chest was like half eroded. That's fucked up and disgusting. And they're just letting people live like that too. So this is all despite the fact that the Public Health Service stated. So this whole freaking organization that's in charge of this actually stated that penicillin could treat syphilis both in early stages and later stages. So why aren't they giving them these penicillin treatments.
It blows my mind that there's people out there that could look at other humans. Like, even I understand that back then they thought that they're colored people.
Inferior.
Yeah. But it just blows my mind that they could look at people, and these nice people, like the men making home cooked breads and stuff, how they could just look at them and not care that they were going to die, and how they could talk to them every day knowing that they were going to die and like not feel a lick of guilt.
And the nurse especially.
Yes.
So,
and her knowing that they targeted these people specifically because they're the same race that she was.
Yeah. So basically their continuation with withholding the treatment and giving the placebos while watching their minds and their bodies basically literally erode was completely unjustified. So on one particular occasion, there was a new doctor who moved into town at a local hospital, and he was seeing a man that needed penicillin for pneumonia. One of the nurses told him that when he went to write the prescription for the man, he wasn't allowed to give him penicillin because he was one of the participants in the study. He asked what this whole study basically had to do with him giving him penicillin, and she said, "You need to call the health department," because she knew that Nurse Rivers was in charge of taking care of this man, and they weren't supposed to touch Nurse Rivers' patients. And so nobody answered when he called the health department, so he went ahead and gave him penicillin, likely saving that man's life. And so one of the survivors named Anderson Sinclair said in an interview that he had no clue what they were doing. They would collect his blood, send it off to somewhere to do whatever they wanted with it, and that participating in the study did him no good. Herman Shaw said that he believes these doctors were evil because they forced them to live through all of this unknowingly. And he actually said he doesn't hate them for it, and he is way better than me because I hope those fuckers die a terrible death.
How could he not hate them for it? If not for himself, for others.
I know. He was like big on, listen, I'm not the one who's supposed to be judging these people. And he basically said that if the research they did on him would benefit anybody in any kind of way, then he is basically okay, like, with not hating them.
He is so noble and he deserves the world.
Yeah, he's so sweet. He reminds me of my grandpa. In 1957, it was the 25-year anniversary of the study, and participants were offered certain incentives to continue their involvement in the study. So they wanted to keep these people interested and to make sure that they would come back. They would offer them $25, which in today's money is only $280.
Well, fuck that.
And they also got a certification of appreciation, so maybe maybe that's worth something.
Not even like a cake or cookies.
No. They would also receive payments of $1 to $2 to basically induce cooperation, and that was in the early 1960s. So you get $2 to $2 every time you show up to your freaking appointment.
I mean, that might work for like a 6-year-old.
Well, I mean, back then candy bars were what, like a nickel?
That's true. That's true. I mean, I don't remember.
We weren't alive back then. Of course, I don't remember.
I mean, like, I remember back when I was a kid, I would have done some stupid stuff for enough money for a candy bar. But like, yeah. I'm really sad that that they didn't even give them good payment for what they went through.
I know. $35 for a burial?
Give them $100.
So in 1964, the Declaration of Helsinki was developed by the World Medical Association, which is also, I believe it's called the WHO now, the World Health Organization. So it was a set of ethical principles that were surrounding the human experimentations, basically. And it stated that participants must be fully informed about the research and give their voluntary consent. So basically, the well-being of the patient was the most important thing overall. It had to be the most important thing over the interest of the research, basically. So researching human participants must be reviewed by independent committees to ensure that everything was like up to code and ethical and everything. Um, and all this information you were collecting had to be made public.
Ooh.
The Declaration of Helsinki is not legally binding though under international law, but it's influenced enough to where it's regulation basically around the world. But it's new at the time, so plot twist. Not really plot twist. They didn't follow it.
You mean they don't think morals and rules and regulations are important?
No, no. So, in the mid 1960s, while working as a venereal disease investigator for the U.S. Health Service in San Francisco, a man named Peter Buxton learned about the study and he was deeply disturbed. He raised his concerns about the study to officials at the CDC, but his objections about the study were dismissed. He continued to advocate for the patients, though, and he believed that they deserved proper medical treatment. He doesn't even know these people. He's in San Francisco, and this is all happening in Alabama. So in 1969, the doctors all met in Atlanta to discuss if the study should continue. They talked about the possibility of finally treating these men who are suffering. They discussed doing further studies on the bodies, like collecting tissue samples and sending it off. Um, and they came to the decision that they were going to continue the study until they all had died. And one of them was quoted in the documents as saying, "I don't think it will make a difference if they get treated or not."
Yeah, because you've made them live with it for so
Yeah.
long.
And so it's speculated that they didn't want to end it with survivors because they would have to offer them all explanations. And they also wanted to see the study to the very end because they didn't want to leave it unfinished. One of the doctors is quoted in an interview, "Once you start a study, you don't leave it unfinished. You finish it."
But technically, this study was only supposed to go on for a few months, and after those few months, it was finished.
Yeah. Well, because there was people still living. They didn't get all the data they wanted. They had these 399 men that they were salivating for to die so they could look at their bodies.
I feel like at this point, they've had enough autopsies of the men that they should be fine.
Because there was only 89 living participants. At this time, there was only 89 living participants, 36 from the control group and 53 of the infected.
Okay, so if that's 53 of the infected, that's like 350?
340 people basically have died.
That they can't let the 50...
No.
That's ridiculous.
So, during this meeting, they believed that if they kept a good relationship with the local doctors in the area, they wouldn't get criticism. They acknowledged that the civil rights movement was a threat to the study, and they discussed paying someone within the local health department to be there, basically their in-person, to make sure if you find anything out, you need to let us know. We're going to pay you off, basically. They knew the racial implications of the study wouldn't be accepted, and they emphasized on building relationships with people in the medical field and local governments to avoid backlash and public outcry about the study and to make sure it wasn't found out. Peter Buxton collected all the documents he needed as proof that this experiment existed, and he filed a second protest in 1968 highlighting the political sensitivity of the study. And this was in the wake of Martin Luther King Jr.'s assassination. Of course, Peter's protest was also dismissed this time as well. He talked to all kinds of reporters, and none of them were interested in picking up his story until 1972. He was frustrated by the lack of action that was being taken, and he was talking to all kinds of reporters, and none of them would pick up his story that he was offering around. And he actually leaked information to a reporter at the Associated Press named Jean Heller. So he sent her all these documents because he worked at the public health service. So he had access to these documents. They were in the database and he gave them to her. So she wrote an article and it was published in July of 1972, and it exposed everything, all the unethical practices of the study, including the fact that the participants were not informed about their true diagnosis and they were denied effective treatment even after penicillin had become available. 26% of them were found to have neurosyphilis. Out of the 201 control group, 2.5% had central nervous system disease. And that is basically they've had a stroke, meningitis, like some kind of brain or spinal injury, and that includes epilepsy. So it's just like a generalized term of shit's kind of fucked up in here. So life expectancy of untreated syphilis was now 20% less than the men who were part of the control group. And the untreated group had 2 times the amount of eye defects because of their syphilis.
You said that their life expectancy is only 26% less or of the control group.
Yeah.
And that doesn't seem like a whole lot, but like also thinking of like the condition they had to live in is so miserable.
People were only living to be like 80. So like 20% left. That's 20 years.
That's depressing.
Almost. Yeah.
And then being so miserable the entire time.
Literally going insane and going blind. So this article led to immediate public outrage, and it received widespread media coverage, prompting the government to take swift action. The government tried to cover up how many people truly died because of their untreated syphilis.
Typical government activities.
They stated that only 7 men had passed away as a result of the syphilis, but it was uncovered that the death rate might have been higher than 100. There were counts of men who were untreated dying from unrelated reasons like accidents and whatnot, but higher than 100. Trying to pass off as 7. So in addition to the death of more than 150 Black men had developed heart disease because of their untreated syphilis. It was also uncovered that one of the men found out he had syphilis and he drove to Montgomery to a clinic to get treated. And the doctor, I think the doctor gave him treatment. Whoever was in charge, I don't know if it was Nurse Rivers or who, but they found out what clinic he went to, called the clinic, and they threatened that if he ever treated another subject from Tuskegee, they would lose their federal funding. So they were threatening, hey, if you treat one of our people again, we're not going to give you money for your hospital anymore, which is extremely fucked up.
Yeah.
It was also revealed that 40 wives and 19 children had developed syphilis during the course of the study. And that's not even accounting for all of the children who died before they were born because of untreated syphilis, because that was also very common. Like people had untreated syphilis so bad they would miscarry.
It's so it's depressing that anyone got it and was untreated, but it's so depressing that kids were brought into this world with it because of this experiment.
And they, like, a lot of them also had, like, birth defects because of it.
So then that's just affecting them there. Like, some could probably get treatment for the syphilis after they're born, but then, like, the ones with the disabilities having to suffer their entire lives.
Well, and hey, this untreated syphilis is causing heart defects and is affecting their brains, what is it going to do to a fetus? Like, how is that going to affect their development?
Did the survivors get compensation?
Yes. In response to the public outcry, the United States government initiated a series of congressional hearings to investigate the Tuskegee Syphilis Experiment. These hearings were conducted by the Senate Committee on Labor and Public Welfare by Senator Edward Kennedy. Peter Buxton, along with other officials from the Public Health Service and government agencies, testified during the hearings, and Buxton's testimony was crucial because it highlighted the ethical violations and the lack of consent. As a result of the hearings and public pressure, the study was finally terminated in 1972. So imagine how long the study would have happened if it wasn't brought to public attention. It was only ended because people found out and they were outraged by it.
It's crazy that this study was still going on in the 70s.
Yeah.
Because you don't think of like that kind of stuff still happening. Like whenever you hear about stuff like this, you think it's like from like the 20s or 30s.
Yeah. So the government acknowledged the unethical nature of the study and they committed to providing medical care for the surviving participants for the rest of their lives. A class action lawsuit was filed in 1973 on the behalf of the participants and their families against the government. They wanted money for the harm that was caused by the study, and in 1974, they settled out of court, probably because they knew they were going to lose. The government agreed to $10 million, which included lifetime medical benefits and burial services for participants and the families.
Was this $10 million per participant?
No,
or
it's just total.
That's fucked up.
Which, yeah, it is fucked up because each living participant of the study who was infected got only $37,500. Which, sure, that's quite a bit of money, but like,
still not worth it.
Is this $37,500 going to make up for like years of shit that y'all did?
And suffering.
Mm-hmm.
And then the things that happened to their families.
Yeah. So the families of the dead victims that were infected got $15,000. Living members who served in the control group got $16,000 because they're just chilling. They don't have syphilis. Their families got $5,000 if their family member was in the control group who died. The settlement also led to significant reforms in medical research and ethics, including the establishment of the National Commission for the Protection of Human Subjects of Biomedical and Behavioral Research, and the implementation of the National Research Act of 1974. These reforms aimed to ensure that the unethical practices would not repeat in the future. In 1975, the wives and widows of the participants were added to the benefits program, so they would also receive lifetime medical care. Unfortunately, though, none of the fucking doctors were held accountable. They got no criminal charges and no repercussions, like, at all.
Sounds about right.
They got off free.
It's probably because the government deems their study useful.
Mm-hmm. The study had created a deep distrust towards the healthcare providers for African Americans.
Makes sense.
Which, rightly so. Participants and their family had significant psychological trauma due to the extent of harm and deception. And many of the survivors had severe complications from ongoing mistreatment. They were unable to work. In 1997, President Bill Clinton issued a formal apology. He said that the nation did not live up to the promises it made and broke the trust and betrayed the African American population of our country. And Herman Shaw from earlier was one of only 8 infected survivors who were alive at the time. He gave a speech alongside President Clinton, and he actually was one of the most educated participants of the study, and he had graduated high school. Like, he had no college degree or anything. He was the most educated.
So did he know, like, understand a little more what was
Um,
going on?
well, they didn't have their consent, so he didn't really know what was going on. Um, he trusted the government and the doctors, basically.
As one would think you should be able to
Yeah,
do.
and you're getting treatment. Like, you're getting aspirin and tonics. He did think it was kinda weird, though, that they were all receiving the same things. They had different symptoms, but they were all receiving the same treatment. He did find that kinda weird. But he just was like, "This is part of the study." You know what I mean? Um, in his speech, he talked about how unjust actions were taken, but it was all down to forgiveness and learning from our mistakes. So, way better man than me.
I couldn't forgive.
No, I
There's no reason to forgive.
would be committing crimes. So, this wasn't the only study, by the way, that the government did where they didn't have consent from the participants. In fact, there was a study done that was sponsored by the US government, and it was in Guatemala where they purposefully infected people with diseases and they withheld treatment from them as well.
This
And
one sounds familiar.
and guess who fucking was in charge of that one? Dr. John Cutler, the lead researcher who took over in 1936. So, yeah, that study, however, wasn't discovered until 2010 when Susan Reverby started researching the Tuskegee experiment. You know, that's probably going to be a research topic for me to do on an episode. So I'm not going to go much into detail, but would you guess it? It was also a vulnerable population that was being taken advantage of.
And I imagine they didn't know what they were
No,
signed
because
up for to do either.
these people were orphans.
Oh.
They were also people who were in the mental health treatment centers down there.
Oh.
So they had mental illnesses, they were vulnerable, and they were also orphans, literal children that they were infecting with syphilis and gonorrhea. So Dr. Cutler did die in 2003.
Darn it.
Thank the fucking Lord. Too bad he didn't die sooner. And the final survivor of the Tuskegee study, he was in charge of, passed away in 2004.
I like that he survived longer.
I know, so did I.
It's kind of like in your face type thing.
Yeah. He got to see the man be buried. Actually, he was one of the people in the control group.
Oh.
He died of natural causes though, and his name was Ernest Hendon, and he was 96 when he died.
Dang.
I know. And that's all I got.
That's depressing.
It is super depressing.
I think the families and the victims deserved a lot better compensation. When you said 10 million, I was like, oh, these people made out because
Yeah, so did I. I was like, dang, there's like not really too many of them left. But I also wasn't thinking there was people in the control group.
still though, you would think, I mean, I just don't understand where the numbers add up to 10 million.
Yeah, but I think it also was going out to their families though too.
I mean, the families deserved it.
Yeah.
They could have dished out a little more money, I think, but
Yeah, I mean, granted, yeah, they're living, so they need more money. But like to get less than half after your family member died as a result of this study is pretty fucked up.
yeah. Well, I don't know, maybe if it's kind of makes you seem like an asshole, but like I feel like the control group didn't really need as much financial.
Well, that's why they only got like 16,000.
I still think a little more of that could have gone to the people who were actually suffering through it. But
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure that it was tough for them too, but they weren't going through the symptoms of untreated syphilis for X amount of years.
Well, and also part of that money, I'm assuming, did go to the lawyers because think if it's being settled out of court, there's already, like, lawyer fees and everything accumulating that they're gonna have to pay for, so
Those lawyers should have done it for free just for
I
being,
know.
like, just to be good people.
Well, and also, like, the publicity that they got for doing that case, like,
Yeah.
it had to be, like, priceless.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's fucked up.
It is fucked up. And it actually happened not really that long ago if you think
That's
about
the
it.
crazy part is that it was in the 70s is when
Yeah.
it ended.
And it wasn't public knowledge, like, there was no public record at all that this was going on, and that's how it got away with being, like, taking on for so long.
And I feel like most people kind of assume that like these kind of experiments, like human experiments, don't really happen on like American grounds
Mhm.
because America's gotta obviously keep their stuff
We
hidden.
got some past.
But so it's crazy that it really happened here and like they can't even deny it.
Yeah. And, like, they promised this black college, like, this prominent black college, these people are gonna get treatment, yeah.
That's what I was wondering. Does the college nowadays like play homage? Like do they like
There is a memorial for the Tuskegee experiment. I don't remember where it's at. I'll have to look it up.
cuz I'd be a little afraid to go to that college knowing the history.
I know there's a memorial, but I don't know exactly where it was. There's also a movie that they made about it. It's called Miss Evers' Boys, and that basically focuses on Nurse Rivers'
I was
side. And you know what? Sure, she was like part of their community, but how could you fucking do that?
I was gonna ask if anything came from Nurse Rivers or if she got out just like the doctors.
She died. She was older when she came part of the experiment, and she did end up retiring, and that's why they were like, we should like pay someone off basically in the community because they didn't want to lose her because she was their in and she had to retire because she would get lost, like going to patients' houses, and they couldn't rely on her because she effectively was like kind of going out of it a little bit. So yeah.
Well,
The people are sure like defending her, saying she also was a victim, but she knew full well what she was doing. And in the interviews that I was listening to, she was like laughing and smiling about what was happening. Like on like recounting these things, all these doctors and the Nurse Rivers smiling and laughing, defending their actions.
yeah, there's at no point that I thought like Nurse Rivers is like a victim. She
Knew what was happening.
and she could have done something to help bring it to the public's attention or anything
Mhm.
instead of going to funerals
Yeah.
and being like, "Hey, so I know
Hey,
times are
girl.
tough, but can we get into your husband?"
Yeah.
Like, no, that's not a victim.
Yep. And she told them, like, the people doing the autopsies, if you fuck up this autopsy and make them, like, unrecognizable, and she, like, promised these people, you'll never know. Nobody will ever know that an autopsy was done. We'll be careful. We'll make sure that there's no signs. She said, if you fuck up these autopsies and if there is, like, anything out of place, you will lose these people's trust. And they're not going to agree to do this anymore. So she knew.
Plus, what the nurses said about don't touch Nurse Rivers' patients,
Mhm.
like that's pretty
Yeah.
scary. But all around horrible people.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening.
If you enjoyed this episode, you can find us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Paranoia Pair Pod, all one word. And we'll see you next Friday.
Stay spooky.
Bye.